Today's discussion is on Qiu Miaojin's landmark Taiwanese lesbian novel, Notes of a Crocodile. Set in early 90s Taipei, Notes of a Crocodile is many things: an epistolary novel, a diaristic novel, a coming-of-age campus novel, a surrealist novel, but above all, it is a queer novel, most famous for establishing the term crocodile as a self-referential term for lesbians in Taiwan. John and I provide some important context for queer representation in Taiwan, and then spend much of our time unpacking the novel's unique approach to form, character, and plot, as well as literature's ability to manifest identities and feelings which often go unexpressed or unformulated. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
So Ben,
yes,
I have a question for you.
Fire away, John.
You like NERBs?
I love NERBs.
I love NERBs too.
I do love those NERBs. Big NERBs, small NERBs. It's my weakness.
For the uninitiated, we're talking about the New York Review of Books and their lovely paperback collection, which Ben and I are both big fans of.
Some have even referred to them as the A24 of books,
Yeah,
which I don't know if we agree with that personally, but
I mean, I don't really know what they're trying to communicate there, aside from the fact that they both put out a very nice, slick, aesthetically pleasing product.
and I love them. I actually I'm kind of soured a little bit on A24, but I've not soured on NERBs. So
yeah, A24 has been a little bit more miss than hit for me lately, but this is not a movie podcast. Movies, throw them in the garbage.
but yeah, you're just sitting there, you're passively absorbing something. I want active engagement.
Exactly. This is a podcast for intellectuals, and we believe in using our brains to experience art, not just letting Martin Scorsese or whatever other Hollywood sicko just broadcast his thoughts into your head through the silver screen. Movies,
Yeah.
done with them.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. We're just throwing them out. We're a book podcast. We're talking about NERBs, which is, John, if you put a beautiful piece of artwork on the cover of a book, I'll buy it. Yeah.
In fact, we're talking about a NERB with a beautiful piece of artwork on the cover this week, aren't we, Ben?
Indeed we are, John.
Wonderful. Yeah, guys. So I know at the end of last episode, we said we were going to have a special one for you this week. Unfortunately, we had a slight scheduling conflict come up with our guest. So that has been pushed back to next episode. So Ben and I had to kind of scramble and figure out what we were going to do for this week. So Ben struck on the great idea of talking about Notes of a Crocodile. You show G. In my terrible learner's Mandarin.
Oh, well, it's better than I could do, John. I would have just stuck with the English translation title, Notes of a Crocodile, which the author's name, I believe, John, do you want to take a swing at that one too? Or
yeah, the author, this is written by Qiu Miaojin and translated by Bonnie, I think that's Hui, yeah, it's pronounced, but that one I'm not sure about.
I mean, that sounded pretty good. And John, this was for me, kind of a like audible instinctual pick because it's a book I had read a couple years back when I was and I still am, a half price books scounger. I would just look for the aisles. I'd look for beautiful books, half price books, and I would routinely see NERBs. And this is before I even knew what a NERB was. And I said, that looks like a pretty good book. And I picked this one up, and it is I would say an epistolary novel about a coming of age queer person in college in Taipei, Taiwan from like, what is it? Like 1989
to like 1991.
Yeah. So 4 years of college. And, as John alluded to when we were talking about it, we're not Taiwanese lesbians. So why are we reading this book? And I think I have a couple reasons that I like to lay out just up top, and then we can go from there. I think that a book that is written as a epistolary book, this one is more of a novel, although, or not a novel, a diary, although there are some letters in it. There's letters, there's descriptions of movies. There's a part of it that I'm gonna save for a minute. I think approaching a book as a diary is really fascinating to me because we're usually used to books that have, you know, discernible like main characters and discernible plots. And when you're reading like a book that's presented either as a epistolary novel, which some of the earliest novels were, or a diaristic novel, you get a approach to characterization and story that feels really refreshing and is often done through things like fragmentation, ellipsis, illusion, sort of techniques that like sometimes filmmakers use. And I think that's partly why she likes using film movie descriptions in this book. But you get these techniques that you don't normally associate with, I don't know, like bourgeoisie narrative, if you wanted to describe it that way. And I think reading like a diaristic novel, no matter like the content, is like really fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've all read first person narratives before, and those obviously put you in the shoes of a character in a very direct way. But the diary format really gets you into the character's head on a whole other level because you're getting kind of direct access to like the character's thoughts on things in a way that feels like even less distanced than like a normal first person narrative would. I think because, like you said, there's this kind of not an embodied quality, but there's this kind of found object nature to this sort of a novel where ostensibly you are looking at something that the character has written versus something an author has written from the first person perspective of a character.
Exactly. And like this book consists of, I believe, 8 notebooks, and she makes reference to actual notebooks that presumably like either these are or she transcribed these from those. And so there's this sort of like emphasis on the writing process, which she also mentions at the opening. And I guess we should talk about the other half of this book, which is not a queer coming of age campus novel that also happens to be written as a diary, but is about a crocodile.
Not just a crocodile, but like kind of a whole underground society of crocodiles.
Yeah, crocodiles which wear human suits.
Yeah, they're kind of these surreal, funny animal fables about these crocodiles attempting to blend into human society and kind of the gradual discovery of them by human society at large.
Which mirrors the sort of actual discovery of lesbians in like Taiwanese popular culture.
Yes. So actually, that is something really interesting. As I was doing some preliminary reading for this book, I found out that at least as of 2016, when an article I read entitled Queering Women in Taiwan from the American Journal of Chinese Studies, written by Ya-Chen Chen, the term crocodile is still commonly used slang in Taiwanese LGBT circles, as well as the term lazi, which is the name of the protagonist of this novel. So this book was incredibly influential for the Taiwanese queer lit scene in the 90s and going forward. And to the point where this slang is still somewhat current almost 30 years later.
And I would even say, too, that the fact that it's written as a diary is almost vital to that, because it's, you, like John said, you know, it's not quite direct access, but it gets very close. And I think like I like reading diaristic novels so much. I'm a real big fan of the Notebooks of Lauda Maritz Brigge, which is Rilke's like version of an epistolary novel, the poet Rainer Rilke. And like in that one, you're just inside this guy's head and you see the world he does. And that's kind of what happens here, except instead of like, you know, plot, you get like interactions between characters. You get some effusive, almost like poetry prose that John and I were saying is both kind of beautiful, but also overwrought because she's in college. And, you know, when you're in college, you're like, you have big emotions and you don't know kind of what to do with them. So you get like that. And then you get like really insightful discussions of films that the character likes, and also other literary influences as well.
Yeah. So before we get a lot deeper into the book itself, I do just want to take a quick minute to kind of talk about some of that preliminary reading I did, some of this research, just kind of about homosexuality in China and Taiwan in particular, kind of the history of it, and just kind of giving us some grounding for this book. And just so, you folks at home kind of understand where Qiu Miaojin was coming from in 1994 when this book was written. So again, in that article I read, made it very clear that as in all human societies, there has always been homosexuality, or at least homosexual acts going on in Chinese society, as in all human societies. We can quibble about whether or not homosexuality is like a cultural construct, exists in all societies, but homosexual action does. But Western style homophobia, as we understand it, did not really exist in China until kind of the modernization in the early 1900s, late 1900s. So particularly the article I read cited the May 4th movement, which was a modernist nationalization movement that really kind of kickstarted Chinese nationalism as it would develop kind of through the twin branches of the Kuomintang, which was the nationalist party that eventually founded the government of Taiwan, and the Chinese Communist Party. Both of those movements kind of have some roots in this May 4th modernization movement, which was, like a lot of modernization movements in East Asia and kind of the broader non-Western world, was very much focused on bringing Western science and education and the good parts of Western society to their countries. But in the process of that, also tended to pick up some of the unfortunate prejudices that Western society has trafficked in for a much longer time. And in China, one of those was homophobia. There was very little like direct queer organizing throughout kind of most of the 20th century in the Sinosphere, broadly speaking, just because there was so much going on in China between the aforementioned, nationalist reform movements, the World War II, Japanese occupation, communist revolution, etc. So really, until kind of the late 20th century, we did not see a whole lot of like organized gay and lesbian political activity, really developing into kind of a structure that we might see today. But in Taiwan, at least, homosexuality since the 1990s has kind of been on a steady uptick of acceptance. So in 1994, when this book was written, the first lesbian university club in Taiwan began operating, and the first lesbian or LGBT bookstore in Taiwan, Fem Books, opened. In 1995, they had their first openly gay candidate for public office, who was named Zhuang Songfu. And the first transgender organization opened in 2000. Gay marriage was legalized in, I believe, 2018 officially, though there was some kind of funkiness with the courts for a while. I believe as of today, it is still legal in Taiwan. And as of 2016, kind of to our purposes, Taiwan has at least 8 explicitly LGBT booksellers or publishing houses in their kind of literary ecosystem. So Taiwan, at the very least, it does have a pretty accepting atmosphere towards homosexuality, at least, insofar as any country does. As the podcast resident queer person, obviously no country is quite perfect there yet, but Taiwan seems to be doing fairly well. I just want to take a brief moment to say that the status of homosexuality and transgender persons in mainland China is a little bit murkier legally. The Communist Party tends to be a little bit squeamish about officially endorsing homosexuality, but there is also a lot of misinformation that is spread around the internet about kind of the CCP being like a super reactionary homophobic organization. And from my conversations with queer people in the mainland, that is very much overblown. So I just didn't think that was a fair thing to bring up. But yeah, so when this book was published in 1994, there's definitely movement towards a more accepting attitude towards homosexuality in Taiwan. But obviously, that is still a hard place to be as a queer person when these movements are really just beginning. Qiu Miaojin, I do want to say, as we really get started digging into the book, she did tragically commit suicide in 1995, a year after this book was published. And after reading this book, I think that is a real tragedy. I know she wrote one other book that I know you looked into a little bit, Ben.
Yeah, she had one book that got published right before called Last Words from Montmartre, and I think it's basically a version of her suicide note that was written in a similar style. And I know we'll talk about the plot of this book, but I think in this book, she kind of writes herself a happy ending, which consistently works for the book. But when you know that, it makes it really, really tragic. So
yeah, I think that this is a really huge loss to Chinese literature, world literature. This was somebody who I think had so much talent, and I'm sure that they had other things weighing on them outside of just kind of queer issues, but it is just so sad that we live in a world where people feel the need to do things like that. And just a tremendous loss. I don't know what else I can say there.
I think you put it pretty well, John. And I think also that like one of the other sort of issues of this book too is that she's kind of like articulating a language for her identity that like didn't really exist at the time for where she was. So I think like that's another really interesting reason to read this book, I think, as well. And also, and again, John, thanks for the history lesson, because like I think one of the reasons I like NERBs is that they'll often publish stuff like this, but sometimes, and this is also, in translation, sometimes like there's some context that's going to get missed, us being, like Westerners from, the Midwest. And so like sometimes it's useful to go and look that up because like you do kind of need it for some of the stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Whenever I'm reading a book, I read a lot of Chinese literature, and I think that's another reason you suggested this one is, I'm a fan, as listeners have probably guessed from my, again, terribly pronounced Mandarin earlier. I've been learning Chinese for the better part of the last 2 years. Still not very good at it, but yeah, I really love Chinese literature, and there are still times where even despite what I've read, you just find yourself really rubbing your head up against like, I can't fully wrap my head around what's being said here. With this book in particular, Chinese is written in characters, not, alphabetical words the way we have in English. And there were some references in this book to how characters are written and kind of what that might mean in like terms of the context of a person's name or something like that. And something that I always like get a little bit annoyed with in translation is like they don't give you the characters, they just give you like these transliterations that make it very hard to kind of go back and find out what the characters would have been. And so some of these references or even like puns or wordplay can get lost pretty easily. I found myself wondering a lot about names of characters in this book and whether or not they were supposed to be, some kind of pun or wordplay, kind of given the way that this character talks. I think there's a very good chance that some of these names are meant to be funny or meant to be kind of pseudonyms, in her diary.
Yeah, and La Z. I know they talk about Z as an extra syllable that they give.
Yeah, so Z is a common suffix that just kind of is placed at the end of like a lot of nouns, just kind of to make the word 2 syllables. So, and in this case, it's kind of in the case of her name, La is the verb for to pull, and so adding the Z turns it into a noun. versus a verb. So I guess it wouldn't quite be like polar. It's not really like, it's not actually a thing that like anyone would do with like a regular word for the most part. At least that's my understanding. I don't want to overstate. Like I said, I've only been studying for 2 years. I'm not an expert by any means, but yeah, definitely love reading literature and translation, but it is always, you always have that kind of glass pane in front of your eyes that's keeping you from seeing exactly what's going on, which is why I'm such a huge advocate for learning languages, especially to read, because obviously you can't learn everything, but man, I really hope to someday in the future be able to reread this in the original language. I think that'd be really, really amazing.
Yeah, and that also reminds me, I know Roberto Bolaño had that huge sort of like spate of his stuff getting translated in English, and he wrote this essay that I think was kind of like him either coming to terms with how many people are reading him in English or like the act of translation. And it's called Translation as an Anvil. And the point is that like, if your book is good enough, it'll survive getting translated, which could be him kind of being like, okay, I have to come to grips with how many people are reading in English. But I always like think about that in terms of like, I think it's worth it to try anyway. But the real thing would be, as you said, John, actually reading it in the original language. So,
I mean, I am also a big advocate for translation, just from the standpoint that, again, like until we can figure out like how to upload languages into people's brains somehow, like most people are, if they're lucky, maybe going to be able to have time to learn a handful of languages, let alone be able to like read high level literature in them.
Man, that'd be better than drugs. Just imagining like downloading like an entire language, like that would be incredible. So, yeah,
the best. Yeah, I can't even imagine. But I'm a huge advocate for translation. I think reading in translation can also be an amazing experience. And I also think that translation is an art form. I think it's a good translator. Like, to be a good translator, you have to know 2 languages, and you have to be good at writing in at least one of them. If you're a good translator, there's a lot of bad translations out there. And I think that is kind of what turns people off, especially if you're reading kind of very stodgy old translations from, say like the Victorian era or something. But there are a lot of modern translators doing great work, including the translator of this book. I read a phenomenal interview with her, Bonnie Hui, with World Literature Today, which we'll link in the show notes, where she just kind of walks through like, being a literary translator. And she did a great job with this. And I will definitely be on the lookout for other things she is translating in the future.
Should we jump in or?
Yeah, Ben, I feel like that's enough kind of scaffolding there.
Do you want to start a little plot and then we can go from there?
Yeah, listeners, this book opens in 1991. So that's 3 years before the publication date. And the main character, Laza, which is not her real name. Again, it's a nickname given to her by a friend of hers later in the book. She never gives her proper name anywhere in the notebooks. Has just graduated from Taipei University, and she's just picked her diploma up from the registrar's office,
which is very big. yeah.
It's very big, which, as someone who went to a university that gave out big degrees, I felt for her. But also, it's really big, but I guess not in any kind of like frame or case, because she says she drops it twice, once in the mud. And then the second time she drops it, it just blows away and she can't catch it, which very much kind of serves as a very funny, but also, like it's a very like black comic opening for a book that I think in a lot of ways is like a black comedy.
And the way she presents it is she almost gets the entire idea for the book right there. And there's this cool kind of surrealist bit where all of these characters that you'll hear from just start talking to her in the opening. Like at one point, when you visit, will you bring me some presents? The crocodile wanted to know. And at this point, like, you don't know who the crocodile is because the crocodile hasn't been introduced, but it's like she gets the entire idea for the book right there. So,
yeah. And she says she's going to write something about her college experience and, kind of her experiences over these years. for 5 cents a word.
Yeah, and there's like some great self-deprecating humor where like she's talking about how like the lights go out and she's running around with candles during the middle of writing, and she goes, that's how it is writing a serious literary work. And I feel like in that opening, there's just the right amount of like self-deprecation humor that I'm just immediately in. I'm like, okay, I want to read what the work is. Like that's like, you know, it gets me immediately.
Yeah, I think that like the comedic tone that a lot of this book takes is so key to why I enjoyed it so much, because this book, it reminds me a lot of, very kind of bleak, dour literature that maybe someone like it reminded me in a certain way of, I guess, maybe like, this is going to sound maybe a little over much, but it reminded me a bit of Mishima's Temple of the Golden Pavilion. These kind of very dark first-person narratives about a guy just kind of being like, I'm so fucked up, I'm so depressed.
And in Mishima's case, and queer too. Like, yeah. So I'm glad you brought up Temple of Golden Pavilion, because when she meets, so at one point she meets a character which we can talk about later, but she literally goes, the lights above the highway were like a golden pavilion. And I literally was like, this
you're doing the DiCaprio point.
Yeah, I was doing the DiCaprio point because, one, she's established the basis for us to think about Mishima as she's reading it, like on the first page. I didn't read, but Mishima talks to her after she drops her diploma. I'll give you the most beautiful picture frame on earth. Would you like that? Ask Yukio Mishima. So like, and she referenced Mishima later, but then she meets the character, and when the character gets her, because he's also, we'll talk about like kind of like bi, and maybe he doesn't accept gender. It just, the lights become a golden pavilion, and it's like everything is like aligning perfectly. And I think that's also the benefit of like an epistolary novel, is like you can do illusions like that, because otherwise you'd have to like explain them and you have to do all this thing. But you can just throw that as like an offhand, and it's like a huge character moment that's basically encapsulated in an allusion to something else. So
absolutely. But yeah, I think that I've definitely read some novels, and I mean, Temple of the Golden Pavilion, amazing novel. Don't want to like give it short shrift, but I think that the tone that Qiu Miaojin captures so well here is the tone of like, an overeducated like 21-year-old who is just incredibly depressed, like over well read, overeducated, and just very depressed about the fact that like they are aware of the world in this very like heart-wrenching way. And obviously that is not to take away from the fact that like this is a character who's struggling with being gay in a society where that's illegal basically. But
yeah, well, and like she doesn't like, it's clear that she's sort of like, well, at one point she talks about how like failure and disappointing her parents. And so there's this sort of like her coming to grips with like, she's not doing the thing she's supposed to be doing in terms of like having a successful life or something. So
yeah, but it's very easy to like have a character like this whose kind of patheticness is their core trait, and have it come across as excessive or unlikable. Like, I don't even want to say unlikable, because this is a tangent, but like I hate the conversation about like protagonists have to be likable. No, they don't. But like it can get tedious. But I always found like a core of like lovability in Laza. Like there's something very, very relatable about her, and very familiar about her as someone who was once a overeducated queer 20-something who was incredibly depressed.
And also like along those lines, you get some of her first real attempts at relationships, which I would say are kind of like the plot. Like she meets somebody and they fall in love, and it ends very poorly. Then she meets this kind of cast of characters that serves as a relief. One of them is that character I mentioned earlier, where he's like this sort of ne'er-do-well bisexual guy. And then she meets these two, well, when they're presented almost like sisters, but she meets these two girls and they're not sisters, but they have like a very close relationship that's eventually revealed to also be queer. And so then like that kind of takes you through the book, her interacting with these characters. Then she gets in another disastrous relationship, and then it kind of ends.
So yeah, that's definitely like the that's the skeleton of the plot right there. And this is a pretty short book. We said we kind of had to find a short one this week because our schedule got changed around. This is a pretty brief one, but there is so much character in there in that time. Because like there are some chapters in this book that are like 1 page long, or like even 1 paragraph long. But so much of this character's voice like shines through, even through the fact that it's like in translation. The really phenomenal work here.
Oh yeah. So along those lines, John, you're saying the character comes through. Also, I didn't take my driver's exam seriously enough. Took it 4 times and failed. Although 2 of those instances were due to factors entirely beyond my control. What's even better is that I publicly claim, and perhaps society buys it, to have failed only twice. Whatever. I don't care.
As someone who failed their driving test that many times.
Yeah, John doesn't care either. All right, well, so yeah, I guess we should get a little closer. Do we want to talk about the first relationship?
Yes. So that is, I think, one of the most interesting in the novel, perhaps unsurprisingly. It is with a girl named Shui Ling, who is an upperclassman. She kind of had seen her in passing before she started university, but they kind of fall in love gradually over the course of her freshman year. And what I find so interesting about this, and it kind of goes back to something you said earlier, Ben, and it runs through the whole book, but I found it to be the most in the case of this relationship with Shui Ling, is that the language is a huge limiter here for these characters.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, again, like I said, this is like a foundational like lesbian novel in Taiwan, the word lesbianism never comes up once.
Yeah.
You know, there is this element where Laza is completely aware of her attraction to women from the beginning of the book. From the second chapter, I think she says that she always viewed relationships as basically being about like, you have this ideal image of the opposite sex in your mind, and you end up with the person who like meets that image the best. But she is like a man, and that her like stereotypical image is of a woman, not of a man. And so she's aware of this from day one. She knows she is attracted to women, but she cannot describe that. Like she doesn't have like a word to use for that or an identity to like wrap that up. And it's just, it feels like this mutation.
Yeah. And which is why the crocodile stuff's in the book, because it's almost like the word is crocodile. And so like when you get the crocodile chapters, like there's one part where like she's talking about a movie and she goes, the lead actor in the movie, clearly a crocodile. And since like you know like what kind of that means, it's like, okay, so he's either gay presenting or queer presenting, like, and so like I don't know, it's almost like she has to build this language out of it. And so the fable kind of elements of the crocodile who has a human suit become like the stand-in. And while she doesn't use crocodile in the reflection part, in the book itself, that's like the word for lesbian. She basically just invents, more or less.
Yeah. And I think there's something really interesting there, because like the homophobia experienced in the book, I mean, there's very little in the way of like direct homophobia. Like there's never like a scene where like someone finds out she's gay and like beats her up or anything like that. It's all very much about like societal pressure, like societal expectations. And that's something I find really interesting as well, is that like you think about homophobia like in modern Western countries, like even when it is kind of expressed in more, we'll say like secularized countries today, like in Europe, there's still kind of all this religious baggage to it.
Yeah.
And in America, it's almost always kind of explicitly religious baggage. But in, obviously Taiwan is not like a Christian country. There are Christian people there, but, they're not the dominant force in society by any means. The homophobia is kind of expressed in terms of like secular society. Like that's where it has to stem from, because there is not kind of this religious element in the same way. And so it really makes you feel even more separated from regular society. Like there's this kind of element where it's like, to be human is to get married and have babies, right? And like get a job. And when you have the same sex attraction in this time period, in this place, like you can't do that. And so it actually makes you like basically non-human. Like you have to like think of yourself as a different species, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, that like in the first relationship, she's like, well, maybe I can try just loving from afar. And then she's like, I can't really do that. Like, it's like almost, it's like physically impossible. And then like the relationship kind of like it sort of like peters out because like she doesn't accept herself and she has all this internalized shame. And then like it's sort of like the her and that other girl, they sort of just like, it's just like the first relationship in college, it just like ends disastrously kind of. So.
No, it's sad. And again, I guess it just goes to show like, how important like having like the words to understand yourself are. It's something I think we take for granted in kind of Western LGBT circles now. Is like we have all this language. Maybe some people would argue even like too much language now.
Right.
But the opposite is probably even worse in some ways.
I feel like Foucault is lurking over that point you just made, and I'm just not going to bring up Foucault. So we'll just leave it at that.
Save it for a bonus episode, Ben.
Yeah. So that relationship ends up kind of, petering out. We could talk about Meng Shang now because he gets introduced sort of like.
Yeah. So crucially, the relationship essentially ends because Laza, like Ben said, she can't accept herself, but specifically she's very scared of like actually consummating the relationship. Yeah. She expresses like her sexual desire kind of in terms of violence and consumption. Like she says that she wants to like eat Shui Ling. She wants to like rip her flesh off and like eat her bones. And obviously like that is a very disturbing like thought process. And so naturally it gets in the way of their relationship, because crucially Shui Ling is like, does love her and like wants their relationship to be everything it can be despite, societal pressure. But Laza is just too disturbed by her own desires to be able to consummate it. So she gets avoidant, the relationship falls apart, and she kind of seeks refuge, in platonic friendship with a bunch of other people who all turn out to be queer.
Right. Well, and to follow it up before we move on, I think it's crucial that like the bestial imagery gets used not in the crocodile chapters, even though the crocodile chapters are about a crocodile. Like sort of like it's like the crocodile chapters are like the idealized version of what she could be. And then when she's like encountering her desire in the sort of real life chapters, it's like animalistic and she's afraid of it. And also she runs away a lot in the relationship. And there's sort of like a tragic moment when she realizes that, was it Shui Ling?
Yes.
Shui Ling like accepts her for who she is. And when she points that out to you, the reader, it's too late. Like, the relationship's been over. And so it's sort of like if only I had known at the time, I could have maybe fixed it. But it's like John was saying, she hasn't quite accepted herself for who she is yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing too, with this book, and it kind of gets back to some stuff we were talking about before. I think something that's really interesting in this book is obviously, like we said, there's a lot of homophobia in like Taiwanese society at this point, but there's also a lot of stuff here. Like you said, this is like a type of relationship that I feel like is so common, like regardless of your sexuality, when you're in kind of your first independent period, like when you're in your undergrad and you've never had this level of freedom before, and you get in a relationship and you just immediately fuck it up. I know I went through a relationship like that when I was in college. And there is this element where it's like, how much of this is because she's gay? How much of this is because she's just, 21 and completely like a mess?
Well, and also later she goes, I knew I was a fuck up, but I kind of liked being a fuck up. Like there's like a kind of self romanticization, like, I'm a loser. Yeah, like, you know.
Yeah, there's a phenomenal scene that hit very close to home for me where she kind of describes her depression state, where she's like, when I was feeling good, I would eat a bunch of convenience store food and I'd read Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer and a bunch of other books for desperately sad people like me. And when it was bad, I just laid there, and it was bad most of the time. And I was like, ooh. Ooh, I remember that days of being 20.
Yeah, I also ate a ton of convenience store food at one point during that. Like, I guess it's just like a thing you have to go through before you like learn how to cook better or something. But
yeah, I mean, and I swear we're gonna get to the broader cast because there are a bunch of interesting characters. But I do think that like that is another really interesting part of this book. I wouldn't quite call it a campus novel. I know, Ben, you said some people you read on this book referred to it as such. It's definitely a book kind of about like the positionality of like the college student is very crucial here, because being in college is what lets Laza kind of be the way she is. She makes a big point of the fact that she avoids class a lot of the time, but she's also not working. She's living off kind of not family money, in that like her family's wealthy, but just like, yeah, you know, like her parents are sending her like enough money to get by while she's ostensibly studying.
And I think the clubs that she's sort of like serving as also have dues. So I think she might be getting some due money as well. So
yeah, but basically she's not working. She has all this independence to kind of malinger. And yeah, I think that like the position of college student is such an interesting one. And I'm sure college in Taiwan is different in some ways to like American college, but it feels westernized enough from what I know of it, what I saw in this book. Like, I feel like we can draw some interesting comparisons.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, like the further I get away from my undergrad, like the crazier like the whole idea of college gets to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ben, obviously you're in grad school right now, and you kind of are dealing with undergrads on a daily basis. And it's just crazy to me that as a society, we're just like, yeah, we're just going to turn 18. If you come from the right socioeconomic background, just get to do whatever you want for 4 years. But then it ends.
Well, just today, John, I was at the library and there's no less than just 2 spilled cups of coffee just on the staircase. And like the whole staircase just smelled like coffee. And then you walk into the bathroom and there's just toilet paper. No, there's paper towels just everywhere because they can't seem to make them into the trash can. So like it's just animals, John, animals.
But yeah, I mean, but it is this thing where it's like at 20 years old, like you are not fully socialized.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess the idea is like that by getting away from your parents, it like forces you to. And I guess that for some people it does. But there's like a certain percentage of the population, I have no numbers on this, but I know I was part of this group where it's like, no, it just turns you into a mess.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Mulaney bit where he's like, I paid $100,000 to not drink water for 4 years and to get a paper that said I read books that I did not read. So like,
yeah, I did find something just very true about the way this book portrays like the undergrad experience.
Yeah.
There's a great passage actually that I'm going to read real quick because it just absolutely blew me away in terms of like how true it was to like my college experience. And I think a lot of people's. All right, here we go. College. Now there's a system, though it's not quite death. It's a pretty close second. It's the nexus of 3 major institutions: compulsory education, compulsory labor, and compulsory marriage. And these 3 institutions happen to be the greatest achievements of human civilization. Contrary to expectation, when experienced in combination, they allow for an escape into a transient, self-absorbed greatness. Like death, college serves as a kind of escape hatch. While death takes you straight to the morgue, college is a single rope dangling loose from the inescapable net of society. While in death, everyone receives equal treatment, college is a place where certain people arrive covered in a layer of muck. A nastiness they turn that they in turn smear onto others. To sum it up, the usual bag of tricks consists of going to class, plus taking tests, plus chasing the opposite sex, plus recreation, plus spending money, plus pretending to be interested in joining clubs, plus observing society, plus hanging out. The first 7 constitute 80% of your waking hours. I don't even know how to explain what goes on in that 80% of time. I can go on and still never get to the last one, hanging out. You just have to gather all the tools you can, as if in preparation to outsmart life itself and keep them in that overstuffed bag of tricks.
I forgot about that bit about transient, the self-absorbed greatness is like kind of like the kind of more navel gazy parts of this book, kind of like
but also, like, again, that's what I love about the voice of this book, because it is on the one level overwrought, like purple prose almost, but it reads like something a 20-year-old would write about, like, being in college.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's like what I think is so interesting about like diary novels, because like, I mean, you know, let's just assume you can do anything. I find that you can get in a headspace way quicker if it's a diary, and you can get away with stuff that's not like, oh, a 5-act structure, rising and falling actions, well-developed characters. It's like you're just there. And I think that that's kind of like important to me, I think, in terms of like what fiction can do, I think.
Well, it kind of turns everything into dialogue in a way.
Yeah.
Which makes it just a little snappier.
Yeah, and there's some great snappy dialogue in this book between like her and like her letters that she sends people, but also her friends. Like they're sitting around talking, and you get some great like back and forth stuff. So
absolutely. So speaking of friends, now that I feel like we've kind of drilled down into the college question, let's talk about those friends.
Yeah,
because they very much make up like the core of like, I guess, what we call the second act of this book.
Yeah. The relationship has not worked out. So she starts running into people, and Meng Shang is the first person. And when they hang out, that's when you get the golden pavilion illusion that made me do the DiCaprio point.
Yes. So Meng Shang is, someone she went to like a writing camp with him when they were in high school.
Yeah.
And so they have kind of this standing relationship. And they meet again in college and realize that they kind of know each other. There's sort of this element at first where she thinks that like maybe he's interested in her, but it becomes apparent pretty quickly that even if he is, like, he is not interested in like a traditional relationship by any means. Meng Shang is like he's a weird guy. Like he reminds me of some people that like I knew in college, and some people like I think you probably knew in college, Ben. The guy who really wants to be like the most interesting guy in the room. When he meets her, he tells this story about like how he like basically dropped out of school after they like went to that camp and like was on the streets for 2 years and joined a gang. And it's never brought up again.
And then like at one point it's like, oh, he's in the philosophy program now. He's also, I feel like I can't remember if they say he comes from money. Doesn't he come from money, I think? Or I got
that vibe, but I can't remember if it's explicitly said. But also he very much comes across like a character who is constantly lying to make himself like more interesting, or because his own identity like feels so fluid to him that he cannot quite like, he's kind of not concerned about what's true or false, if that makes sense.
Well, and like, so yeah, his introduction, I'm a year older than you. I go to the affiliated high school. Next year, I'll be at your school. Just hearing the few words you said, I felt as though you were the only one worth listening to. All that other garbage makes me sick. Coming here was a real waste of my time. and then it goes, after crouching for a while, he impulsively launched into a set of squats as if it were some form of self-amusement. So yeah, he's just like, yeah, I see through all the bullshit and you do too. And then he just starts doing squats. Like,
yes. So she meets him. They form a friendship. She meets these two girls that Ben referenced earlier. They're the two who kind of seem like sisters, Jiro and Tantan.
And one of them, I think Jiro is the sort of alluring, like artist girlfriend, and then, or is it who's the overachiever? Jiro's the overachiever, right?
Jiro's the overachiever. She's someone who, she tells it, there's a great little kind of side story in this where she is kind of like Laze. She has no real interest in kind of pursuing normal social goals. And she, like, before taking the college exams, ran away to a monastery.
Oh, yeah.
And basically tried to, like, hide out from, like, going to college. And, like, her mom found her and was like, you're going to take the exam. And she kept, like, kind of trying to sabotage herself. Like, she only put one college on her application after kind of, like, she intentionally tried to flub the test, but, like, was a good enough guesser that she'd scored 6th in the whole country, which Taiwan it's a big country. Like, I mean, it's on that little island, but there's a lot of people there.
Well, that to me reminds me of those people that were, like, just so good at stuff in college, just like, yeah, whatever. Like, I scored 6, I don't care. Like, you know, like, so. Yeah.
And then Tun Tun is the girl who she's a musician. She plays guitar. She's studying zoology, which never quite, like, fully, I think, develops as a theme, but it definitely is kind of, I think, in conversation with the crocodile portions that we're going to be talking about soon. Yeah,
it's almost, they don't quite riff that out, but it was on brand for the book, I feel like, is to have her be interested in zoology. She strikes me as, like, so at one point, Lazi helps her out because she's also depressed. But she also strikes me as the most, like, well-adjusted person, unless I'm misreading it. But, like, Tun Tun seems very, like, at one point, like, Lazi is, like, depending on Tun Tun for, like, support, because, like, she's kind of like I don't know, equilibrium. She has, like, some equilibrium. So
Tun Tun definitely seems like the most well-adjusted because basically what comes out over the course of this second act is that, again, none of them can quite tell this about the others, but they are all lesbians.
Yeah.
And Jiro and Tun Tun are in love with each other. Laze can't quite notice this because she, again, can't recognize, like, her own thing in other people.
And she's putting on this act as, like, the experienced older person, which like, to me also is, like, indicative of college when you're, like, trying out identities. You're like, what if I was this kind of person? Yeah, like,
the thing where it's like you're a senior in college and all of a sudden you're supposed to talk to freshmen like you're their parents or something. It's like they're 3 years older than you.
And so, like, you get this scene where they're hanging out and she's being, like, the experienced older person, and, like, and that's a really great conversation too, because they're, like, feeling each other out kind of. So, like, they're just like, oh, like, are you like this, you know? But, like, also, as you said, John, they can't all just say, yeah, we're all lesbians. So, like, yeah, there's, like, a kind of positioning that happens. And we should mention Meng Xing's, like, on off again boyfriend, who's
I was gonna say the kind of final member of this cast is Chu Kwang, who is I think kind of the most stereotypically gay character. They make a big deal out of, like, he wears very, very flamboyant clothes. He wears, like, a gold belt with these, like, green and purple pants.
Yeah.
Like, just around, like, the club building while he's working on, like, the newsletter for this club he's in. And he's, like, a very large man.
Yeah, pear-shaped.
Pear-shaped. So not quite like a bear, but definitely, he definitely felt like the most kind of straightforwardly, like, gay character. And it turns out that he has this on again, off again relationship with Meng Sheng that kind of is what draws Laze, like, into his orbit, and, like, that's how they kind of get to know each other. He's really the first person Laze meets who kind of expresses to her that, like, I also, like, go through same-sex attraction, but it's not, like, a comforting thing because she, like, Meng Sheng is, like, such a flighty bitch that, like, he's constantly like he's kind of, it's a little stereotypical, but, like, I think it works given kind of the complexity of his character. Like, Meng Sheng is bisexual and, like, he wants to fuck everybody. And he will fuck anybody. And so Chu Kwang cannot, like, be enough for him. So he has to, like, constantly be, like, needling him by, like, bringing women around. And
Right,
Chu Kwang clearly wants to be like in a monogamous gay relationship, and Meng Sheng is not into that.
Yeah, and Chu Kwang also, like, I love the way he slowly gets introduced to Lazi, because like he's like the one disheveled guy at the club meeting, and like they have this sort of like this relationship where they kind of hold each other at arm's length. But then one day Chu Kwang, like, I presumably either got in a fight with Meng Sheng or was being self-destructive, and so like Lazi kind of talks to him, and then they kind of see each other as like eye to eye at that point. And like, yeah.
Yeah, and again, crucially, the word gay never comes up in this book either, or homosexual.
Yeah, and John and I talked about this, but eventually, like, Meng Sheng, Chu Kwang, and Lao Zi all get together, and Meng Sheng's like, let's do without gender. Let's not be male or female. like, and so they all kind of like resolve to do this, but also like Chu Kwang is like bawling his eyes out while they're talking about this. Like, it's sort of like a really charged scene, because like Meng Sheng's being charming and like, who cares about gender? And then like, but Chu Kwang is clearly having his heart ripped out, and Lao Zi's just like there, like finally having a sense of community after kind of being isolated after her breakup. And so like, it's a very charged scene.
Yeah. Again, I think that Meng Sheng is such an interesting character because he, again, this is all stuff that's expressed just in what he says and he does.
Yeah.
There's no labels here, but he expresses, that he's clearly, in some way bisexual. He talks about how he has like a male and a female side of him, and that the female side of him is attracted to Chu Kwang, but the male side is attracted to women. There's also kind of this element where he's bigender or gender fluid or, non-binary. And again, it's really interesting how these terms have in some ways gotten so, again, almost 30 years later and in a totally different country on the other side of the planet, a lot of these terms feel like they're so exact now, or if not exact, like you say them and like, you know what they mean.
Yeah.
But my experience has always been that queer identity is always so much more complicated than just like the term you put on it.
Right.
And I think Meng Sheng really does speak to that, because I think just being like, he's a bisexual, gender fluid character would frankly be giving him like too little credit for how complicated he is.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find, I can't find it. There's one part where he's like talking about the gender binary, and he like kind of deconstructs it like offhandedly, where he's like, this thing is good, this thing is bad, like, and then he just kind of shrug. He's like, we don't need any of that, basically.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character, and again, out of everybody in this book, this is kind of to skip ahead a little bit, but he gets really, he's almost kind of like an omen of, like, I feel like he is the character who, I don't want to say Qiu Miaojin sees like herself in exactly, because I think that they're like, this is all, I don't think this is quite autofiction, but clearly a lot of this stuff is, I think, being drawn from her own experiences.
Right.
Like it very much feels like that. But this character, Meng Sheng, feels like this character who is almost kind of like this. He represents like all this potential, and then he gets just crushed.
Well, yeah, and he's sort of at the end of the book, if we're gonna skip ahead, like he's using heroin, he's kind of like given up. And there's this element where like he's gonna be dead soon. And yeah, like it very much feels like he's this character who like he's chaotic and feels kind of dangerous, but like he's hopeful about the future and like all this potential that that being queer can make you feel like you have. And then like one person, like, yeah, at the end of the day, you're gonna run up against the wall of society, and most of the time, like, you can't just break through that. Well, and too, like at every moment, he's sort of like representing like being out kind of to her. Because like there's that part where they go to the rock club and he like makes out. Well, he sort of like has like a sort of like karaoke scene that's like very central with another guy. And like Lousy gets so embarrassed that she runs into the bathroom. And then he like comes in there and he starts talking to her. And there's a bit where like she basically says like, okay, I accept myself. And he goes, that's a vote for God's existence right there. And it's like I would say the most like punching like your fist in the moment part of the whole book. Like just punching your fist in the air. Like, yeah, we're accepting who we are. And there's nothing wrong with that. And like he gets all the good lines to her. And then, yeah, he ends up kind of like she's like, you're gonna have to like make yourself better, kind of is what she tells him at the end. Like it's like a kind of like pulling him out of the gutter at the end, kind of.
Yeah, like he's dropped out of college, he's using heroin, and I agree. Like there is this element where like she tries to like give him a pep talk.
Yeah,
but I really got the impression at the end of this book that like he's not gonna make it.
Yeah. Which sucks because he's like you said, he's definitely like the most like, I don't know, ne'er-do-well character. So yeah.
Well, again, he's the character who is supposed to represent, again, this freedom and this power that you can get from accepting yourself, and then it's not enough.
Yeah.
And part of that is, again, his inability to commit to anybody or anything and find any stability. He can't make any decisions about his identity, and so he just kind of hits a wall eventually because can't commit to love.
And she says something too about like accepting Qiu Quan because they had like a huge fight. Let me see if I can find it. Have you ever thought about how much Qiu Quan needed your love, no matter how badly you treated him? The smallest gesture meant the world to him. You can't walk away from or deny all that. I think you're afraid of being truly loved. Meng Xing let out a sharp cry, cursing me as he banged his head wildly against the payphone. So like, that's like that's the thing too. Like because at one point she realizes like, she hadn't really accepted herself and she was in these destructive relationships as like a result. And then she kind of tells him what she just learned. And like, he's kind of like, I don't know. The fatalism is kind of sunk in for him. So
yeah. I don't know. Just again, I think if the author had a different ending to her story, maybe I would have found that to have been a more hopeful passage.
Yeah.
But just given where she ends up, where her story ended, I that just felt like kind of this black crow,
right,
in the ending, just on my shoulder.
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying, because I feel like in the book, like we didn't mention the last relationship, but
I figured we were gonna get to that.
Well, she kind of repeats the relationship she had with the first girl, except the situation is different in that she's in love with an older woman who has a fiance, and the fiance and her have a kind of strained relationship. And Laozi basically moves into where the woman is staying, and like it seems codependent. I guess I'm going to use another modern word. It's kind of codependent in that like Laozi is so dependent on this woman for like love, and this woman is not really loving her back because she is more concerned with this fiance. And that's when the book also, to me, I was telling you this earlier, John, the sort of all of these cool characters and interactions like just slam to a halt as she's sort of like back in this bad relationship with this woman. So
well, I think crucially too is that the positioning in the relationship has actually reversed.
Oh yeah,
because Laza in her relationship with Shui Ling, she's the avoidant one. She's the one constantly trying to pretend like there's nothing going on and that she's not experiencing the feeling she's experiencing, where in this one she's the one chasing after someone having them be avoidant to her. Now the exact context is a little bit like you said. This Xiao Fan is the older woman's name. She has this kind of weird half socially acceptable life where like she's engaged and she has a good job, but she also like I think they have sex just one time. Laza says it, up to the point of this writing, it's the only time she's had sex with a woman. But she cannot, again, probably because at some level, like again, there's no terminology for this that she has. She can't say she's bisexual or a lesbian or what have you.
Right.
They have this one moment of bliss together, and then she cannot reciprocate Laz's feelings, and so the relationship falls apart again.
Well, and I think too, I sort of realized at the end there that like Lazi hadn't quite accepted herself, and so she's kind of serving this role for other people that don't like exactly treat her well. Like there's that bit where like the woman gets somehow she ends up in the hospital, and Lazi's
she
like
has a hepatitis.
Oh yeah,
infection or episode.
But basically she like the woman expected her to come kind of running to her side, and she's like, look, I can't do this anymore. like this isn't good for me, and I like you clearly are sort of what did she Lazi describes her as the most desperate woman I've ever met. So like sort of desperate in every way, and so there was sort of like this moment of like moving past sort of like people who think of you a certain way and accepting for who you are, and sort of like, I don't know, your self-image, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that another piece of the puzzle here is, again, kind of subtly in the background of this book, is Laz's attempts to become a writer.
Yeah.
She, again, it's not like a major part of the book from the standpoint, like it is not exactly like what any of the plot is focused on, but throughout the book, gradually you kind of see this develop. The class where she meets Shui Ling is an intro to literature class. And then when the relationship falls apart, she says that she's going to start, she decides to start trying to write.
Yeah.
And she starts reading more actively. She discovers particularly Faulkner.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
She ends up working at a bar basically because for her, Faulkner suggests that like the best career for a writer to have is basically to work in like a brothel or a bar, because you can write all day and then have an interesting social life at night.
Yeah, and she's like, a tea house is basically that. Yeah, so yeah.
And then at the tea house is like a word that can also be used for a bar.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Not all the time, but I assumed, given the kind of context there, that it's a bar that kind of puts on like a more respectable front.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we kind of know at the beginning that she's actually writing these notebooks as a project. And so again, kind of speaking to like the autofiction element here, this kind of feels probably like a lot of what Qiu Miaojin, I imagine, kind of did to put this book together.
Yeah.
And kind of discovering herself.
And collecting all of her journals. There's a lot of emphasis on like keeping a record of how she was feeling and using that as like the basis, which is another, like, again, it gives a kind of like materiality to the way the book's being made that I think is like, fascinating to me personally. And I think like forms kind of the core of like, an epistolary novel or like a diaristic novel. One thing we didn't talk about was like, I referenced it, but what did you think of the like descriptions of movies? Because there's a lot of like descriptions of movies she's seeing, scenes that she likes, and then also like even filmic language, like in the writing itself.
Yeah, so that I thought was really interesting. I think that there's kind of a broader kind of discussion we can have here about like the influences on this novel.
Yeah.
I think the filmic language is, I think a couple things. I think in one part, it's furthering this metaphor of like acting.
Yeah.
That is very crucial, and we got to get to the crocodile soon. We gotta.
We were talking about it a little bit, and then we were like, we're really into the plot.
Yeah, but I think we gotta drill down on it.
Okay,
because it's the title.
Yeah,
ding dang title.
Yeah.
But I think acting is such a big part of this book. The idea that like to be closeted is to be performing at all times.
Yeah.
And how that eventually becomes second nature, and you kind of stop knowing how to like exist for real, so to speak. Like you don't know how to be yourself because you're so used to having to perform. And I think there's also an element here where there's a lot of references to films and also to other like basically who she's reading at any given point.
Right.
So
yeah.
Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard.
Karo Abe, I think, is useful too because he was like, a surrealist. He was also, he gets quoted at the beginning of Death Stranding. If there's any Hideo Kojima fans out there, but like the surrealism as a way to talk about social issues, I think, is really important for her, and that's sort of where you get the Crocodile stuff with Karo Abe.
Yeah, but I think what's crucial there with all these authors and all these films she references is they're all non-Chinese.
Oh yeah,
basically.
Yeah,
they're either European or Japanese.
Yeah, Mishima and then Murakami also.
Yes. So I think that is also part of, again, kind of on the same top, kind of in the same vein as the acting. It's about how foreign she feels.
Yeah,
she does not, I think there's a way where this character does not fully feel like they are a part of their society, which is a Sinophone, Chinese society.
Yeah.
And so the only media she feels like she can relate to is foreign media because she feels like a foreigner by virtue of her queer identity.
And I like this also is, I think, again, a kind of benefit of an epistolary or diaristic novel is that like you can have those influences like infiltrate the text and it just builds more of like a worldview as opposed to like, I don't know, like, again, I couldn't see how you could do that in a standard, like coming of age novel. Like you wouldn't have like a character like Harabe says, or like Yukio Mishima is talking to me and he says, like, there's this sort of like flight of fancy that I think is like, again, what like fiction or literature can do, that especially in this kind of thing that isn't shackled to like whatever standard plot or expectation or something.
Well, I think also it makes it what the characters say.
Yeah.
Like if this had just been like a standard first person narrative novel and that Golden Pavilions line you mentioned cropped up earlier, that does not tell us anything necessarily about Laze or what she knows or thinks. That tells that's the author alluding to Mishima. That's not Laze alluding to Mishima. Again, unless like you said, like they directly do it in dialogue, in which case that's going to feel kind of weird and didactic, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Like, oh, like this is what I think about this. But like, yeah, when the author says it, it feels like the book is like coalescing into like, this is an important moment. For me, it felt like I could see the character's brain saying this is important, which is really cool to me personally. And like, I can't think of another book where it would, you'd have an offhand allusion to something that like unpacks this whole other worldview that like is just alluded to as opposed to like either fully explained or just not used at all. Like again, like the ending of the book, for instance, like Lazi thinks about the end of the 400 blows where there's a freeze frame and then the freeze frame just actually happens in Notes of a Crocodile at the end. So
yeah, there's like a one line of, screenplay dictation where it's like screen freeze and that's the end.
Also, speaking of performing, I guess we could talk about the crocodile because at the end we're told that the crocodile is a natural born performer. So
yeah. Well, let's finally get to it. We're getting a little long in the tooth here, and I do feel like this is such a core part of the novel that we can't just not talk about it. Right. So let's talk about these crocodiles.
So as we've said, crocodiles they wear human skin suits. And they appear to be humans, but they're not. And when we're not following Lazi, we're following one particular crocodile and what he likes to do, what he likes to eat, or she, I guess, what it likes. I guess the book actually, I think, uses it, like what it likes to eat, what it likes to do, like what it does when it's alone.
This is another one of those times where I was like, God, I wish I had the Chinese text in front of me because the Chinese is really interesting. In that the third person pronoun is pronounced the same for all genders, but is written differently, depending on whether you're talking about a male, female, or neuter subject.
That's a whole level of like meaning that we're just not getting. So
and again, I don't have like a good way to put these into these texts, but yeah, as someone who, again, has a passing familiarity with Mandarin, it's very frustrating sometimes. And I'm just like, I wish I could read this.
Well, and so the tone is like both whimsical and also satirical because the crocodile is experiencing the crocodile craze, which is suddenly there are crocodile experts on TV talking about what foods crocodiles like to eat. There are people worried about their own children being crocodiles. And this should kind of remind you of like, you know, like panics about queer identity and like, which again actually happened in Taiwan, but also like I feel like they happen even now. So like,
yeah, I mean, we're kind of living through one.
Yeah.
Like, what is the groomer panic beyond? Hey, did you know that those crocodiles are going to try to turn your kids into crocodiles?
Right, which like the book gets. So John, you had mentioned this, but the part about the anti and pro crocodile league, there's a part where they get represented in the crocodile chapter. And both of them want to keep track of how many crocodiles there are. Like both the pro and the con groups want to say, "Hey, I'd like a registry of all the crocodiles." Which, yeah, it sounds bad. That's biosurveillance. That's pretext for other things. So yeah.
And crucially, again, the crocodiles are not trying to turn anyone into crocodiles. A lot of them seem perfectly happy to just wear their human suits and get on with their lives.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, society is paying attention to them in this way that is very scary. And there's a great line that I saw that, again, really kind of hit home. Let me find it here real quick. All right, I cannot find it, but there's a line where basically at the end of one of these chapters, it ends with a pretty chilling thing where it's like somebody says basically, if there were no crocodiles, we could stop worrying about them if we got rid of all of them.
Ah, man, that's a little too timely. So like, yeah, like, well, right. and too, like, the writing tends to get even more surreal. Like, do you remember that bit about the chorus of Karaabes that are talking all at once? Yes. like, which is like, I love, like, so I would say there's a couple of things going on with these chapters. One, they're a nice break from the action, so to speak, but also two, like, the crocodile is largely at peace with what it is. And I think that represents a kind of like eventually like Lazi gets to that point, but a lot of the time Lazi's not. And the crocodile is just sort of chilling and hanging out and like eating cream puffs. And then there's like a news article that says crocodiles love cream puffs and everyone's like sort of like obsessed with what crocodiles are doing.
And crucially, the crocodile feels like they can no longer enjoy cream puffs because everyone will be able to tell that they're a crocodile if they keep eating too many cream puffs. And just again, as someone who has felt that way in the past, there is this element where, again, this book just really spoke to me on a level that I expected to see parallels between like my life and like the life of a fellow queer person, but I expected there to feel like there would be a lot more distance just based on the cultural distance. Like, again, as someone who reads like a lot of Chinese literature, I expected to feel more of a distance because of the very different cultural context, the very different histories.
Yeah. And
I was just shocked to find this book speaking to feelings I've had on such like an intimate level that I found just really amazing, really moving, and just like, I guess, a really good reminder that despite like the distance between cultures, like humans do have so much in common.
Yeah.
In this really powerful way.
Yeah, and for me, it reminded me a lot of that Rilke novel, which I feel like is like a hetero dude's version of this, because I don't know if Rilke was queer, but a lot of in the notebooks of Maltalard's Brigga, he's talking about like his failed relationships and how like life is miserable and meaningless to him. And then in that book, he has kind of like a spiritual transformation, which is like, again, something that like I feel like you can only really depict with like a diaristic or an epistolary novel. I'm sure there are like standard plots of like, characters having spiritual transformations, but like one thing I want to say last about epistolary, and then I'll be quiet about it, is like, I think you can do stuff with like gaps and fragments a lot better. And I find that the sort of a fascinating way to present a character as a character made out of fragments of stories, of conversations, of references, and not like this plot, this beautiful, perfect plot with no plot holes. You know, Identity is a lot more confusing and fragmented than that. And I almost wonder if these kinds of books are better at presenting identities or voices than your standard one, because again, it's like it's gaps, it's ellipses, it's lacuna, to use a $5 word. And I like that a lot, you know, as a technique and as I guess what I want out of fiction personally. So
well, and that's something we haven't talked about a lot, but the way time works in this book is interesting because it is mostly linear. Like, again, we start in 1991, we kind of then do like and I bet you're wondering how I got here. Yeah. And then we flip back to 1988, and then it mostly stays linear, but there's kind of these odd points where it kind of skips forward or back a little bit. And then there's also the letters, which there are points where she's reading letters that she wrote like a year ago to a person, or a letter that she received a long time ago but never read until this point in time. And like you said, I think that again speaks to the power of this very unique format this novel has. Yeah. That you can do that and it does not feel jarring, but it is still fascinating.
Oh, we should mention that the crocodile moves in with the narrator, or with Lazi. Like that bit at the end where so the author is talking about the tea house, and that's more or less when she meets up with the crocodile, and then they sort of like hang out. like that's like again a moment where like the surrealism and the Lazi narratives like intertwine more or less.
Well, I think that kind of what you were saying, the crocodile kind of represents the queer person at peace with their self, if not with society. Yeah. And I think that like them meeting and kind of finding this friendship or this cohabitation, that's representative of the fact that Lazi has now accepted herself as a same-sex attracted person. Yeah. And even if she has this societal pressure and stigma to deal with, she at the very least is no longer like straining against herself in the same way that she was earlier in the novel. She's accepted she's a crocodile. She's not lying to herself and pretending she's human. Right. Which is that, I mean, that's, again, as you said, that's like her writing a happy ending, which in reality, I guess she couldn't do so or live. Yeah. I wish I'd had more time to read about Qiu Miaojin and her life, because I do not feel like I quite got enough of a handle on her personal story to kind of know, to really feel like I can speculate too much on why she made the choice she did. And I guess at some level you can't, but it's just, I just keep coming back to how sad it is, and just how much I wish that this person who I really came to love as a writer over the course of reading this book, just knowing that they will never have put something out and never got to see a world where maybe they could have if not had like full acceptance, at the very least like maybe had something closer to the life that they wanted. It's something that's so hard for me to like totally wrap my head around, because I know that like things in America are hardly perfect vis-a-vis like LGBT issues, but I feel like there is this thing where like things have gotten a lot better, at least in terms of kind of broad social acceptance over the course of my life, that I've never had to like deal with this same kind of pressure that she did in the same way. And I'm gonna quit talking about myself and
but like that's also what I think is cool about this book too, because like I literally gave people language to improve their situation, and you know that's again also power of literature right there. So cool. Well, Ben, thank you so much for picking this book out. It
was definitely like on my radar because I've looked at everything in from China that's on the Nerd catalog, but I had not quite gotten around to this one, and I had a really wonderful, powerful experience with it. Yeah.
I'm really glad you liked it, John. I'm building a canon of like diary novels, and right now it's just that one and the notebooks of Maltalard's Brigga, which if you want more Notes of a Crocodile, but like a straight guy, a straight guy poet who has money, by the way. So I want to clarify that, but I think it's quite, I want to, I don't know. I'd like to find more books like them. Cause like I was sort of stumbling towards earlier. I think they represent a really interesting approach to fiction that's unshackled from, plot, I might say, or conventionality. So
yeah, definitely also very interested in that. Hopefully that is something we can keep exploring here on the Infinite Library. So before we kind of finish up today, guys, Ben and I want to try something new today, just kind of in the interest of kind of building out, I guess, what you call kind of the Infinite Library canon, so to speak. We're going to try to start maybe at the end of each episode giving you guys another recommendation, maybe a book that or another piece of media that kind of pairs well with what we've just talked about in one way or another. And that might be something where if you read this book and you liked it and you want something kind of in a similar vein, you might pick up one of these. Might also be stuff we eventually get to on the podcast. But, Ben and I obviously are very passionate about reading, and we hope you are too. And we all are just trying to keep that to be read list long enough that we won't finish it before we die.
Yeah, it is, to quote Lemony Snicket, it is highly likely I will die next to a pile of things I was intending to read. So
we're gonna make sure you have that list ready to go when Gabriel blows the horn. So Ben, why do I have a feeling I know what you're going to suggest?
Yeah, so I have two things. One, I'll keep my remarks on notebooks to a minimum. I think I might have been mispronouncing the title. It's the Notebooks of Maltalard's Brigga. I think I was flipping the two, but it's the poet Rainer Rilke's only prose novel. And one thing that I like about it so much is, again, you get these great flowery prose descriptions that are then chapters are only like a paragraph long, and they sort of fill out this like very depressed guy who has, again, a spiritual transformation and basically comes to at peace with himself and who he is by the end. And I think you get some of the most crushingly, despairingly existential writing in the beginning. And then if you're willing to open to it as a reader, you're open to some like really great reflections on like the prodigal son, because he sort of identifies with the prodigal son at the end of the book. And to quote William Gass, if anybody asks who I am, I say I'm this book, is what William Gass says. So that's my plug for that. And then also, if you want Taiwanese media from around this time, Rebels of the Neon God, which is directed by, I believe it's Sao Ming Liang, the same director as Goodbye Dragon Inn, did basically a coming of age novel in Taipei set in about the same time as Notes of a Crocodile. So if you want to see them running around on scooters and basically getting into stuff and not going to class, it's been described as him attempting to do Wong Kar-wai, which I don't quite agree with that, but it is quite good. I do like it a lot. And if you want, again, like the movie version of this, I would suggest that as well.
Wonderful. I was kind of struggling to think of a good pairing for this, just because, again, I am interested in Chinese lit, but this is a very unique novel. I thought about kind of doing the hack thing and being like, for another like animal novel, read Journey to the West and about the Monkey King. But that felt too pat. So I am actually going to recommend some poetry, which is something we have not talked a lot about on the Infinite Library so far. But I'm going to recommend the poetry of Li He, who was a Tang Dynasty poet, kind of known for surreal imagery and kind of morbid and fantastical subject matters. His kind of poetry name, it was common in medieval Chinese poetry that the artists would kind of have a pseudonym. They go by a pen name. I don't know why I didn't say pen name, but his pen name was Wei Tsai, which means devilish talents.
Nice.
Or talented demon. So he is my absolute favorite kind of Chinese poet. Really, really cool. I don't know if he was like a direct influence on this book, but really kind of cool imagery that you would not expect to see in medieval poetry. Very like surreal and kind of psychedelic almost.
Cool.
Imagery. Really, really cool. Nerb has a compendium of Tang Dynasty poetry that I discovered him in. And he was also one of the poets most admired by Chairman Mao. So
wow.
You're a fellow appreciator of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Hey, the big guys endorsed him.
Why not? I like that we both technically wrecked poets, because like Rilke is mostly known for poetry, but I wrecked his one prose book, and then you also just wrecked a poet as well. So maybe we should just do some poetry. So.
I definitely want to. I think it's more a thing of like we got to figure out how to talk about poetry in a way that's going to be like engaging on a podcast.
Yeah,
but that's something I'm sure we'll be talking about. Kind of give you guys a hint of what might be coming down the pipes here. Ben and I are talking about maybe planning out our seasons a little bit more deliberately so we can kind of share our list with you guys and give you guys more of a chance to kind of follow along and read before the episodes come out. So
yeah, you guys have been banging the door down. You're like, give us the list. We need to know. So we're working on it.
Yeah, we're feeling this out. So we're learning and growing just like you guys are. So be patient. It's only episode like 6.
Yeah, our prestigious run of 6 episodes. Yeah. So.
Hey, I think if we do 2 more, this will be the longest podcast we've ever had together. So
that's can I get some air horn noises and cash machine noises? I'm gonna put those in later.
Yeah, when we hit episode 9, that's when it's really gonna get good. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening this week. Just kind of in the interest of kind of giving you guys more of a hint of what's coming next. Not going to spoil who our guest is quite yet, but next episode, provided nothing goes terribly wrong, our next episode is going to be on The Dragon Waiting, A Mask of History by John M. Ford, which was described to me as the Velvet Underground of 80s fantasy novels.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Not everybody liked it, but everybody who read it went and wrote their own 80s fantasy novel.
Honestly, that tracks. That really tracks. That's great. I'm glad I know that now. The Velvet Underground of 80s fantasy. So
yeah, this is I'm rereading this one, so I do just want to say absolutely worth picking up if you read a description and think it sounds up your alley. But we are going to be discussing that next ep. So we hope you'll join us back in the stacks for that here in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Join us in the stacks. There's plenty of room.
Infinite room.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
We gotta like develop the setting of the infinite library more. I keep saying, listeners, eventually we're gonna get into like nostalgia critic style.
Yeah.
Like extended lore bits in these.
Yeah, it's going to be how
all kinds of characters, and Ben will have a hat. Some kind.
John is the only person that I've seen in a million years.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.
Semper Books.
Well, you made a good choice coming back here, because here,
I don't know.
Nerves.
Flows freely here now.
Well, I do love that.
Herbs.
Sir.
Don't call me sir. You call me uncle, or you call me king, like you used to. Remember?
Call you king.
Yeah.
King.
You like
Nerves?
Oh, you know I like
Herbs.
That's my weakness.
Thank you for listening to the Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir. You can support our show by supporting them. We hope you'll join us back in the stacks for the next episode soon. Semper Books, bookheads.